Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're really excited to get started today. Really glad that you've all been able to join us. I'm going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to filter in, and then we'll get started in just a second. While you're joining, just drop in the chat where you guys are joining from, what you're hoping to get today, what you want to learn, what you want to see. Always curious. Okay, we've got Oliver, our CTO, joining us just now.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Can you hear
Hi,
me all right,
Oliver. How's
Shanzi?
it going?
Yeah, it's going well. I am also in London, so I'm glad to see some people are in town.
Okay, great. So we're going to get started today. Just a quick intro. Everyone, my name is Shanze. I'm the marketing lead here at Lightdash, and this is Oliver, our co-founder and CTO. And he's one of the people that's actually built what you're about to see today. So we're super excited to show you guys Agentic BI and everything we've been working at Lightdash. Just a few quick housekeeping things. This is not a slide deck, so there's no slide, nothing's pre-recorded. What you're about to see is the actual product. We're going to be demoing it live, doing real things, which is either impressive or very brave. We'll see how it goes. During the whole chat, feel free to drop any questions you have during the demo. Anytime you have a question, drop it in the chat. We'll try to get to them throughout the demo, but if we can't, we do have a live Q&A section at the end. But for very pertinent questions, we might interrupt the demo. And the last thing is if you've registered but can't stay for the whole thing, this is going to be recorded. So you will get a link to the recording. Or if you haven't registered, feel free to go to our Luma page. I'll drop the link in the chat box. And then you can quickly get yourself registered if you want the recording afterwards. Okay, so Oliver, are you ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the demo, I would love for you to give a quick introduction on what Agentic BI is. I know we use this term a lot. Not everyone's going to be familiar with it. So just a very quick intro on what Agentic BI is and why you think it matters right now.
Right, okay, yeah, that's a great question. So when we talk about Agentic BI at Lightdash, we talk about using current generation agentic coding tools and models. So if you've used ChatGPT, if you've used Cursor or Claude Code or things like this, the idea is that you can use those models and interfaces that you're used to operate Lightdash and to operate your BI layer. So the goal is we want to use all of those, that kind of powerful tooling that we have and apply it to our BI stack.
Nice, that's great. And why do you think it's so relevant right now? So we're seeing a lot of tools talk about AI and BI, but I would love to know what makes Agentic BI different.
Yeah, so maybe one useful way to think about it is what it isn't. So, if you look back a few years, there was a time where a lot of infrastructure that people built, that engineers would build, would be created through the UI. So you'd go like, I'm going to create a server here, I'm going to create a server there. And we realized that was like very hard to scale and also often to reproduce. And so what happened was we got this idea of representing infrastructure as code. And what that enabled was like a ton of automation. And now you can essentially build your whole infrastructure from scratch with like a few lines of code. So with Lightdash, what we did is we brought that to business intelligence. And the idea is that everything in your data stack, from the transformations in your warehouse through to the charts and the dashboards that you have and the permissions, is all represented as code. And so what that means is that you can, like, at a great scale, even before generative AI, at a very big scale, you could create these large dashboards, scale those across like many customers, template them, build your own dev tooling around them. That's the power of things as code. And with the current generative AI coding tools like Claude Code, like Codex, like Cursor, those are so adept at using the reading YAML files and writing YAML files and configuring code in general, that any tool that is kind of very natively code driven automatically becomes like 100 times easier to use, because now you can just apply these out of the box coding tools directly to them. And so when we talk about Agentic BI, and in this session, I'll be using Claude Code to essentially be the perfect Lightdash operator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And that's great context. Thank you so much. So now we're going to stop talking about it so much, and we're going to get straight to showing you guys what it is that Agentic BI is. So let's start at the very beginning, Oliver. Let's say someone has just heard about Lightdash and they want to connect it to their AI workflow. So whether that's Codex, Claude Code, Cursor, whatever they're using. So what does that look like? How would you kind of advise them to start?
Yeah, so I think a great starting point is to, if you already have your hands on, most people I'd say are using something like a Cursor or a Codex or a Claude Code. So we're going to assume that you've tried picking up one of those tools. Maybe you have it running locally on your machine, and then everything will feel quite familiar. We're going to look at a couple of, what does a Lightdash code file look like? What is the contents of that? Although increasingly we won't have to like introspect those code files, but I think it's an important first step to have a look at the source code. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the Lightdash skill. And so the Lightdash skill is a way for you to instruct your coding agent how to be an amazing Lightdash operator. So out of the box, if you said to Claude Code, hey, I want you to build me a brand new Lightdash project with a dashboard in it and all of these metrics, it would do like a pretty good first shot. But we're releasing new features all of the time at Lightdash, new developer tooling and new tools for the agents. And so what the skill does is essentially provide like a concise set of documentation for your agent that's always up to date. So what happens is when you use something like Claude without a Lightdash skill, it's spinning its wheels a little bit. And when you use Claude with the Lightdash skill, now it knows how to introspect your data warehouse. It knows how to build metrics that are best practice and charts and dashboards and how to lay them out and how to use all of the kind of visual components that you get in the BI layer and how to put them together in a way that makes a sensible analysis. Does that kind of answer the question though?
Yeah, it does. I think it's time that we kind of show everyone how you can actually use the skills file.
Okay, cool. That sounds good. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, nice. Right, so yeah, I'm going to open up my editor that I'm using. So I'm using Data Grip, and inside here you can see that I have a very basic like Lightdash project. And what I'm going to start by doing is I'm going to install the Lightdash skill. So I've got the Lightdash. So I'm opening my terminal, by the way. So if you're terminal savvy or not, it actually doesn't matter too much. We're going to run like 1 or 2 commands around here. So don't be too put off. But what I'm going to do is I've installed this Lightdash CLI, which has a bunch of tooling available in it. For example, deploying models and things like that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to type Lightdash install skills. So anybody can do this now. You don't need an account or anything. You can just grab them. And what it's going to do is it's going to create this new directory called skills. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's just installed here. So it's actually wonderfully simple in a way. I'll show you a bit about what the skill looks like. So this is my project that I'm working on, and it's dumped this Claude directory. And if you look at the skill, for example, this is going to explain all about how to develop in Lightdash, the best practice around it. So here's how to use the CLI, how you get all of that power out of the CLI, how to write Lightdash YAML files. And there's a bunch of very detailed resources on things from how to join things together, how to construct maps, and even kind of like a best practice for building a dashboard. So what does a helpful dashboard look like? What do helpful metrics look like? So this is a little bit of Lightdash opinionation, but also how to build a kind of best practice dashboard, essentially.
Great. Thank you so much. And so for anyone that's just watching, what's essentially happened is that Lightdash has now joined the AI stack. So by being able to run the skills file, you can use your AI coding tool to kind of build dashboards and really manage and build your BI for you. So what does Lightdash essentially now know that it didn't know a minute ago? Oliver, it would be great if you could show what Claude Code can now do with Lightdash after you've run this skills file.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So let me hop over to my terminal, and I'm going to use Claude Code here. But when I use that install skills file, it will recognize which model you're using. So if you're using like a Codex or a Cursor or a Gemini, then these skills will get picked up, no problem. So it's not specific to Claude, but this is the environment that I'm going to be using. So when we talk about agentic coding, and I talk about my coding agent, I'll be talking about Claude Code, but you could drop in any other tool here. And so the way that often you invoke a skill specifically is you can just slash develop in Lightdash, or you can type Lightdash, and then I'm going to say, what can you do with Lightdash? And let's see. And now if you didn't have the skill, what we would expect now is it would provide something like quite generic. Maybe it would do a web search to figure out what Lightdash can do, or maybe it would just rely on its model data. But now I can actually see all of the skills that it has available. So it has the ability to build and define a semantic layer with best practices. It knows how to build certain visualization types. It can create dashboards and explore the warehouse and manage your projects inside of Lightdash. So it's kind of like inherited all of this best practice without you having to do anything. And what's interesting is before we launched this skill, people were already being very successful with Lightdash and using Claude Code, but they were writing like very big prompts up front. I want to build a new metric, and I want that metric to be on this model, and I'd like to use that model in a chart, and I'd like the chart to be a bar chart, and all of this kind of preamble that you're putting beforehand because you want to steer Claude Code, into the realm of I'm building a Lightdash project. But what the skill does is it like bootstraps all of that, so you can type something very simple about what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's great. It's with one file, you've essentially unlocked so much capability because your coding agent is now essentially working for you to build and manage the whole layer. And essentially, this is a great segue to the main demo for this live demo today, which is how you can go from a prompt to a complete dashboard. And we can do that in mere minutes thanks to the skill file, and then using coding agents with this, which again is all possible because at Lightdash we build dashboards and charts as code. So your whole BI layer is in code. And with that, I'm going to leave it to Oliver to now demo how we would go from one natural language prompt to a complete dashboard.
Okay, awesome. So we've had no bugs so far, so we're going to see how we go with a live demo. You're always taking a risk. So I'm connected to ClickHouse as my data warehouse right now. And so I just want to show you a little bit of the data that we've got in here. So this is for a company that sells chipsets. So they're selling these NVIDIA GPUs, which are taking off right now, and they're flying off the shelves. And we're interested in monitoring the performance of our sales team that are selling those products, who our biggest customers are, which generation of chipsets are popular and are flying off the shelves. And that this is all inside of our data warehouse. And so I have a customers table. It's set up as a kind of Kimball model approach. A customer table, some order statuses, a big dictionary of products, and I have all of our order and quota data for the sales team. So there's kind of three moving parts. There's the data warehouse where all of the data is living right now. And then I've got I've got my coding agent, which is going to be kind of like our Lightdash operator. And then we have Lightdash itself. So the goal is to kind of drive Lightdash to build dashboards there, to build a semantic layer using Claude Code by only having data in my data warehouse. So I set up this this project here with very little information. So I essentially have a Lightdash config file, which really just says which warehouse that you're in. And after that, I did a very basic outline of what a handwritten YAML file might look like. So the Lightdash the YAML has been around for a number of years, and people have been writing this stuff by hand for the most part, maybe templating with some kind of template library. And we also had some automation to kind of create, by, for example, inspecting the schema of a certain table inside of your warehouse, we could list all the dimensions out, for example. And this is what it would look like. So you just reference the table in your warehouse, you reference the dimensions. So these are the ways that you can cut your data, for example, by date, by category, and then your metrics, which are your ways to kind of roll up. And this is, in fact, the semantic layer, the whole semantic layer. And for each one of our tables that we want to expose, we're going to write one of these YAML files, and we're going to write all of the dimensions, metrics, And metadata, for example, how do we want to format dates? How do we want to format currency? And those kinds of things that become like really important in telling a compelling story in the BI layer. All of that is represented as code in one place. You kind of have one source of truth. What I don't have here, so I was happy to write this earlier. I didn't want to write anymore. I also didn't write a chart or a dashboard code file. So there's also YAML files for charts and code. And those historically have almost never been written by hand. They're usually exported from something somebody's built in the UI, because there's just a lot of configuration to build even a fairly simplistic bar chart. But using Claude, we can generate all of this without actually having to write it ourselves. And we just go in and kind of review what happened. Shanza, is that like making sense so far? If that's helpful,
Yeah.
if there's anything else you want to know, I can kind of dive into it. Otherwise,
No,
I'll
I think
jump
that
to
makes
Claude
complete
and
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, let's jump into Claude.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So here I'm just going to ask build models, metrics, and a dashboard to measure the sales performance of what do we call Chipco. I want to know top line revenue, the status of orders. Cool, and I'm gonna fire that off. And like I mentioned before, there's already all of this information that Lightdash knows, or sorry, Claude knows about Lightdash. But all it has available to it right now is these tables inside of the warehouse. And so it's going to start by essentially looking through the warehouse to find, okay, actually, this is quite interesting. So we can see it iterating, and we might occasionally hit it, like see it hit an error. And a really important part of the Lightdash skill is there's a big suite of verification that it runs. So a really simple type of verification would be, let's just throw this to the background for a minute. Might be, did I do my indentation correctly on a YAML file? Like anyone that's handwritten YAML knows that sometimes you maybe like indented it wrong or something like that. And Claude with the Lightdash skill can pick that up. So it can, every time it writes a YAML file, it will go and lint that YAML file and check that it passes a bunch of criteria. And if it doesn't, because we have this agentic loop, it can recover. So for example, here it's tried to execute some SQL against our warehouse, and it forgot that we were querying ClickHouse. And so it goes like, okay, actually, I've realized that I'm in ClickHouse, so I need to run my SQL slightly differently. And so it's recovered. And that loop is so important, the ability to have Claude like try something and know that it got it wrong. That's really the important part. And so it starts with a very cheap kind of verification. We call this almost like the verification pyramid. We have a very cheap type of verification, which is the YAML the right shape, all the way through to very expensive types of verification, where it can even render the entire chart from the config file it's made, and then look at that. And it can actually use an image model to take a look at the generated chart and make sure, are the colors right, are the axes off, and those kinds of things. And that's like such a rich area of research right now. And it's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to, let's see, it's finished working on the semantic layer. So let's go and dig into it. So this is our fact orders table that I had only written a few things. And you can now see it's enriched it with all of the joins. So it's figured out how to join sales rep and customer data to the orders table. And it's gone through and added, for example, formatting. So it knows that the discount should be represented as a %, that the unit price is in dollars and should be formatted that way. And it's writing all of these. And for example, we have that for customers, order status, and sales rep. So it's gone and built all of that for us, which has saved me like a ton of time, because, and these are actually probably relatively narrow tables. You know, if you imagine you have like a fairly modest table with 40 to 50 columns, then that's like a lot to configure. And in Lightdash, there's also such a rich amount of kind of properties that you can put on the dimension to make sure it always appears as a certain color or always has a certain format. And Claude has access to all of those. It's going to be like an MVP version, this one shot, but we can always tune it from there. We'll see how much time we have. Okay,
So
nice.
Oliver,
Yeah, Shanze.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, so while we're waiting for Claude to build this dashboard, I would also love to know, like we talk to a lot of data teams, and I think one thing we get a lot when we run them through this workflow is why should we trust AI? Like how can we trust that everything that we will get from this dashboard is data that we can trust, we can put in front of our stakeholders with complete confidence that this data is accurate. So I think while this is running in the background, it'd be really helpful if you can talk us through how we're able to trust everything that Claude Code is building for us.
Okay, yeah. And actually, so Claude just finished, and so maybe it's a good time to talk about this. So one thing that's quite different about this agentic BI approach, as opposed to a product where maybe you've experienced like a coding agent in a product. Typically, what that means is that it's like directly operating the product for you. So it's maybe just like executing SQL queries and building charts. But here, what we're doing is we're generating like reviewable code for our semantic layer. Like it's not going to query or compute some metric that's completely wild. We can go and say like, okay, if it's showing me revenue, then I know it's summing this field in this specific table. Like there's nothing statistical about that. It's like very much deterministic. And so what's nice here is that, yeah, we can use Claude to get huge productivity gains on generating this configuration, but this is still like very reviewable. You can put it through a pull request process. And with Lightdash, we support having multiple environments. So you can take this code, you can run it in like a dev environment, look at the underlying code, look at the produced charts, and then you can upgrade that to staging and then to production with whatever review gates you want. So one of the big benefits of having everything as code is that it follows your existing kind of like lifecycle and governance process that you have. All of the queries that go through Lightdash, the charts, the dashboards, whether you use AI to ask a question, it all goes through the semantic layer, and that is represented here as code. Does that kind of like answer the question?
Yeah, that answers it perfectly. So if we're done with the dashboard, let's jump in and see what it looks like.
Cool. Yeah. So you can see here, it's just letting me know that it's built out that semantic layer. It's built out some charts and then a dashboard. And I'm going to be very lazy and ask Claude to open it for me. Yeah, and let's see what we get. All right, so this is the dashboard that it's built, and it's given me, look at this. It even gave us the donut chart. It had the option of the pie chart, the donut chart, and it considered this to be like slightly less evil, which is something that I appreciate. So yeah, this is so I've done no configuration. I think what's really amazed me in moving to Agentic BI is actually the dashboards are still fantastic. This is a great way to get a glance at the state of, for example, my sales analytics. But there's so much clicking because it's a very visual task to move these things around. But now all of a sudden I'm able to just like create all of these, and you can do that at a huge scale. So you could create 10 or 15 dashboards, and you could also refactor a lot of dashboards all in one go. And it's actually added like a few features here. So for example, it even gave us the option to filter the dashboard in different ways. And because the Lightdash dashboards are powered by the semantic layer, we also get, for example, a lot of interactivity out of the box. So we could do, for example, show me all of the canceled orders. It says here we've got 280,000 canceled orders. I can press view underlying data, and then I can drill like straight down to those canceled orders, for example. And that's really powerful because I don't have to kind of like vibe code very bespoke user experiences. I can just like use what I already have under the hood, which is super cool. Okay, maybe my ClickHouse instance is turned off at this point. But
No,
yeah, is there something else you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think what's important here right now is also to notice, like, while Claude Code was able to do this, it's so important to notice what you were not doing. So you weren't in a UI, you weren't in a chart builder, there's no dragging and dropping to make this whole dashboard, which would have probably taken maybe hours, but Claude Code was able to do it within a few minutes, right? So I think that is essentially such a big unlock for data teams. And that's what we've seen when we're talking to data teams, that the amount of time that we've been able to save using this workflow is immense. Before we move forward, we've got a few questions in the chat. So I'm just going to bring them up and we'll answer them before we move on. So the first one that we've got here is, how do you connect AI such as Claude or Gemini to your organization's DBT database using Lightdash?
Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, so Lightdash has the ability to sit on top of, I'm just going to run some stuff in the background. It becomes addictive at a certain point. So Lightdash sits on top of your DBT project. So all of the configuration for Lightdash lives inside of DBT. It can also live outside of DBT. So we have essentially two ways that you can configure your project. And the workflow is very similar. So you can imagine if I go back here, I have all of these models files here that aren't linked to a DBT project, but this models directory could also just be DBT models, like the exact format that you have right now. And it would use your DBT models and enrich them with this kind of BI metadata and deploy that to Lightdash. The charts and dashboards operate exactly the same, and they would live alongside your DBT models. So essentially you have a single source of truth. Here's all my transformations inside of DBT. And here are my charts and dashboards. And so, and then the workflow with the AI is the same. And it also has the ability to understand DBT projects. So if you wanted Claude to, for example, change your, like do some more modeling, create some new DBT models, it would also have the ability to do that, which is super cool. And if you have your own DBT workflow that your AI agents already follow, then it would also follow, it would do that as well. So it's like you can integrate it into whatever workflow that you have locally.
Okay, I see that we've got a map chart on the dashboard now. Do you want to talk us through what you did here?
Yeah, so I just felt like there was some more some more interesting stuff that we could have shown here. So yeah, I just went to I went in and I said like, hey, can you show me what the revenue looks like by country? Actually, I think I just said like, what are the biggest countries, which is a bit vague, but yeah, I figured out I was asking for revenue per country, and I also wanted to know what the top products are, so I can see here like for each of our regions what's there. I always like a map chart, and you can also see here that NVIDIA, knockoff NVIDIA chips are dominating on the revenue front, which is cool to see. And yeah, like I mentioned, there's like a ton of interactions that we have here. So for example, like without doing anything, I can just say like, hey, let me cross filter to Canada, and let me just see like all of my sales performance for Canada, and it's going to refilter the whole dashboard. So I mean, to answer your question, Shanzi, I didn't do much. I just complained to I complained to Claude and said like, hey, I want this to be more featureful. And there's like a ton of other stuff I could do as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's how easy it is to build when you kind of adopt that agentic BI workflow. And it's mostly like catered to like just natural prompts, right? You talk to your coding agent, you say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And it's essentially doing that building for you. Before we move forward, we've got another question in the chat, which is asking, how does the skill file interact with already built DBT or Lightdash YAML files?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a common one. So it like Claude is pretty good at following a bunch of different skill files and will load them when necessary. So when you ask about DBT, it will usually load like your DBT skill or an existing skill you have. And if you ask about Lightdash, it'll load the Lightdash skill. Internally, we also operate many more skills than just the Lightdash skill. And we have some of our own, like DBT practices internally. That's very much a Lightdash team thing, and not something that other teams might not model their DBT data the same way. And so both work. You can operate Claude Code with your existing skills and enrich them with Lightdash, and it's not going to send it kind of like around the bend. It's very opinionated about how you use the Lightdash tooling, which makes sense. But outside of that, it doesn't tell you, you have to have your models in this format, or you need to structure your YAML in DBT a specific way. But like, let me know if that doesn't answer the question, and pop another message there.
Nice. Okay, we'll take one more before we move on to the third demo, which is when you deploy the dashboard to prod, is it usually through a CI/CD process? And will it just live in your GitHub repo with DBT?
Okay, yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I'm a little bit in YOLO mode here. So I showed you the, I can go in here and I can dig into the, exactly how my dashboard is laid out and like what all of my, how my charts are defined. But I'm not putting this in Git, and I'm pushing this also straight to what is essentially my production project, Chipco. And you can imagine that for some teams, it's be quite unusual to deploy straight to production. And so a best practice workflow here is essentially that every developer can have their own Lightdash project. So in Lightdash, we have these things called previews. And I can open one of these like straight away. So you just go here, you go to create preview. And what this does is that it forks my entire production project, including all of the content, and I can work on it there. And so usually the best practice would be you're working with Claude, but you're working on a branch. You're working on some draft files. And you can look in your preview project, you can delete everything from your preview project or whatever you do, and it's not going to affect production. So people won't see that for those production dashboards. And then what you would typically do then is open a pull request inside of GitHub or GitLab or whatever your VCS provider is. And then everything only gets deployed through CI/CD. So that's a really good question. And because Lightdash is code-driven and CLI-driven, it supports any CI/CD process that you're running. If it has a really complex bunch of forking and a big DAG of like reviews and gates that it has to go through, you can do that. If you want to push to production straight from your machine, you can also do that. And again, like these aren't, on the governance side, these aren't things that Claude can just work around. Like this is your development process. Like if you don't allow people to push to main, and if you don't allow people to like commit directly to the production dashboards, so Lightdash has like a rich set of permissions features in there, then like Claude can't work around that. Claude can't just like push to main on its own. So I think a big way that I often think about being successful with coding agents is like put them in an environment where it's very easy to say yes to them. You don't want to be prompting them like, hey, make sure you don't like push the prod and delete everything, because that's a very statistical gate. Like ideally you have a clean sandbox. And what I mean is it just can't push to main, where then you can run Claude with the Lightdash skill, and it can kind of be extremely creative, give you those huge productivity boosts without you having to just like open up your production dashboards. So yeah, I would say best practice, use CI/CD, and we could do a separate like webinar on that, because there's like a ton of different best practice patterns you can follow.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's one of the questions we get asked the most from data teams is just like help and advice on what are the best practices to follow. Okay, so before we move on to the last part of the demo, I just want to confirm, Oliver, is there anything that you want to run through, or are you happy to move on to our third and final demo?
Yeah, let's do it. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is probably the part of the demo that I am the most excited about as well. So when we talk to data teams, I think a lot of the time when they're considering using a new BI tool, it is the migration that scares them, because I mean, migration is tough. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. And most people, obviously, they're starting with existing dashboards. But one thing that we actually discovered in what we've been using, and it's been very exciting, is using this Agentic BI workflow to help with migrations. So what Oliver is going to show us now is uploading a screenshot of an existing dashboard from a different BI tool, and then asking Claude Code to essentially rebuild that in Lightdash.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so this is really there's two parts to that process. We've already showed that we can go from quite a loose dashboard spec with Claude into something governed, and complete, like a full dashboard. So when we say like, oh, how do we take some existing content? It's really about saying, can we reverse that process and take an existing dashboard and derive from that what's its layout, what's the content on there, like which metrics and dimensions does it touch? And maybe this was before there was a semantic layer or a DBT model. So what's happening there? And so let's get into that. So I have a screenshot of this must be the most simple dashboard in the world. I have this one that I just exported from my BigQuery environment. It could have been more complete. It was more so that I found it very frustrating manually clicking and creating all of this piece by piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to screenshot this, and you can imagine this would be your dashboard in whichever tool you have. And it doesn't have to be like a dashboard. It could be a snippet from a notebook or anything like that where it has context. So I'm just going to say, hey, also, can you create a new dashboard that perfectly that spelled perfectly wrong, reproduces this screenshot of another dashboard. and let's see what happens. So all I've done is I've just taken this and I've passed it into Claude Code, and that's because a lot of the current generation coding agents, they're multimodal models. They have the ability to take something like an image and understand a lot of the context in there. And so actually, you can see it's already said, I'm going to create a dashboard that has BigQuery custom SQL as the name of it. The left is a table of product names with the count of orders. And let's go up here, and the vertical and bar chart of the same data, essentially. And it's figured it out. It's just written the files very quickly. I already had a lot of context in memory at this point. And it's deploying it. And let's see if it opens it up for us as well. Or I'm going to have to manually click a link. If you can imagine.
Yeah, I think with this, it really helps because with a lot of customers can then handle a lot of their migrations automatically. There's a fair bit of dashboards that they can kind of just migrate without having to do a lot of the manual work that they would have had to do in the past. And I mean, we've had a lot of customers kind of use this workflow to migrate dashboards onto Lightdash. Oliver, when we have data teams that are locked into another tool, what do you think is usually the hardest part of the migration?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's like until now, it was like, oh, okay, how are we going to move across all of this content at scale? Okay, now this is interesting because this dashboard that we just made hasn't rendered yet. I'm very curious to know why. I'm going to find out. But for the most part, it's like creating that. It's like, oh, how do I take everything that we have? And also maybe it's also a bit of a mess. You know, I've got all of these dashboards everywhere. How do I know what I want to bring across? And then when I've chosen what I want to bring across, like, how can I do that without taking like a whole bunch of time? And for the most part, like that, okay, I've exceeded my ClickHouse database. We'll try one more time. But yeah, it's usually like what moving that content across would take a lot of time. And you have this trade-off, like, okay, we know that on the other side of the migration thing is going to be a lot better, but the journey is just going to be like quite painful. And what you can do now is that you can, okay, there we go, we're in. This is what I get for running this on like a very small ClickHouse instance in the background. But it's taken this and it's brought it straight across, and it even used my default SQL name of F0 as the title, which is quite interesting. So that's usually like the trickiest part. Like, how do you move everything across kind of in bulk?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think migration is the one thing that keeps a lot of people stuck on old tools that they're no longer happy with. But because they've built so many dashboards there, they've got such a big backlog that kind of stays stuck in them for a really long time. Okay, I thank you so much, Oliver, for showing us those three things and being able to demo those three things for us. We're going to move on now to the Q&A section. So we've got a little bit of time to answer anyone's questions if they've got any. I've been watching the chat and I know that we've got a few more that I'm going to read out for you, Oliver. But before I do that, I just want to make sure there's nothing else that you want to highlight, nothing else you want to talk about. So I'll give the floor over to you first.
I don't think I have much else to talk about here. Actually, one thing is I've just seen that on this one, these numbers don't look right. I can see that instantly. And so what I'm going to do while I answer people's questions is I'm going to tell Claude that I'm suspicious of this and that it needs to go ahead and fix it. And then let's see where we get to.
Okay, great. So while Oliver does that, I'll pull up the first question. So we've got someone here just asking Oliver if you can talk more about our semantic layer. And just like particularly the how our semantic layer is able to provide that governance that we need to make sure our AI is performing well.
Yeah, so the governance part really comes from the fact that the aggregations and everything that you have inside of the semantic layer are deterministic. They're reviewable. They are something that you can like introspect. It's not statistical. It's not writing like some big SQL query. Then it's something that you can easily look at. So for example, I go to my factor orders table, and I think I kind of drew attention to this earlier. Is like, hey, we know that revenue is like sum of total amount USD in my warehouse, and that's locked in. We don't need to debate revenue once it's in there. And this is quite a simplistic metric, but you can imagine something a lot more complex. And also there is like one more really big benefit to separating the semantic layer from the content that you're building, whether it's in a notebook or a chart or a dashboard or in an ad hoc analysis. Because if the definition of total revenue changes, there's only one place to update it. I just update it here, and everything downstream, like any future query, or even all my existing charts and dashboards, automatically use the new version of revenue. So let's say I decided I also wanted to migrate my whole data stack. Like I didn't want to use dbt, I wanted to use something else, or maybe I want to change my data warehouse. You just swap out that one component, kind of like on the back end, and everything, all the data consumption layer stays the same. So it's like you have the governance aspect of the semantic layer, but it's also just like a great technical decision to decouple the data consumption from how you define things in the semantic layer.
And what would happen if someone asks Claude to build something or answer a question that it's unable to? I know you mentioned earlier on that there's sort of a verification loop where if it runs into a problem, it will attempt to verify itself. But at what point does Claude either give up or would it ask you for more information?
Yeah, so the current models are really good at asking for information if it's not there. And another workflow that really strongly mitigates against this is the plan and then apply workflow. So typically with Claude, and maybe for this demo would have been great, so they're like, hey, can you actually plan this dashboard? Or can you plan the metrics? And then you can see, even if it starts spiraling, you'll see, oh, okay, actually, I know that these don't look right. And so if you plan first, you can mitigate a lot of that. But I will say you don't see it much. If it doesn't see the data that it needs, then it'll tend to ask you like, hey, it doesn't look like this is available in the warehouse. Do I need to add some like extra tables or something like that?
Right, and we've got one more here in the chat, which is asking, does the Lightdash Skills also take care of materialization optimization, for example, partitioning or clustering?
That is a really good question. So on the DBT side, it leaves that quite unopinionated and in your hands. But inside of Lightdash, we're actually just launching cached tables. And so Lightdash has a very opinionated framework to make sure that it materializes a cache that enables your dashboards to be accelerated much faster. And so, oh, it's rerunning this. There we go. It fixed it. I wonder what the bug was. We'll go and check that in a second. But yeah, when you run that cache, then Lightdash will be very opinionated and say, hey, I can see you're building this dashboard that looks at revenue per chipset that you're selling. And so I think that you should cache and materialize that with all of the right partition keys. So actually that's coming, which is very exciting. But in terms of your DBT project, it's pretty unopinionated. There's probably one or two features if you're really hot on making sure you're hitting the partitions. Lightdash has a clause called SQL where, and what this will do is it'll force a filter on every query that you have. And so you can make sure, for example, if you have a table, I was working the other day with some blockchain data, which is like terabytes of data, and I only ever wanted to query a maximum of the last 7 days. And I knew that that was a partition as well. And so I added this clause here, SQL where, to the semantic layer, which means that similar to how a metric is defined or how you define permissions in the semantic layer, any query that goes through the semantic layer would always hit that partition. So you never have this danger of like, oh, what if someone like forgets to add the partition key on my query? So the semantic layer can bake all of that metadata into.
Great, thank you so much. Are we going to go back to the dashboard that we migrated?
Yes, let's go back there. So it says here, metrics didn't aggregate correctly when grouping by dimensions from a join table due to a fan out, and it actually resolved it for us. And so if we go back to our dashboard, you can see that these numbers are now exactly what we had here, 23,670, 23,670, which is super cool.
Yeah, that's great. That also answers one of the questions I had, which is like, what happens when Claude gives you an output that is pretty confidently wrong? But it's great to know that with one prompt, it can kind of go back and self-correct.
Yeah, and there was a customer we were migrating off a tool, and as well as passing so what was missing here? A lot of the time, what you don't want to do is like hit a scenario like this where you go like, oh, these numbers didn't match up, so like AI is not going to help us. But actually, the models are really, really great productivity boost. But only if they have the right verification flows. And what was missing here is I was looking at this number 23670 and the number that was on the Claude generated dashboard, and I could see that they're wrong, but actually Claude didn't know that. And what we've done previously, we've actually dumped both CSV exports of tiles on a dashboard with the screenshot, and then it would be able to check like directly, which is if we scroll up through here, you'll actually see that it will execute these charts in Lightdash to see the output, and it was able to look at it and go like, oh yeah, it says 750K. That doesn't seem right, and then it's re-executed it and say like, now it's correct. You can see here in the prompt, it told me what the correct numbers are, and that's because it's able to verify the numbers in Lightdash. I didn't give it a way to verify the numbers in the image.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Oliver. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we are now about to just wrap up. But Oliver, what I would love to know from you just in general is what comes next. So we've got this Agentic BI workflow. Lightdash is pushing out, Lightdash is doing great, but what is next for data teams? How do you see Lightdash building this out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So right now, I think you see more and more people that didn't have that engineer hats on, jumping into Claude Code and things like that. But I still think there's just like something a bit sometimes intimidating about doing this in the terminal. You know, I didn't have to write very complex commands or anything to use this. I just opened Claude Code. But sometimes even then, looking at the YAML files can be tricky. So actually what we're just about to launch, if people are interested in joining our alpha group, is that you will have essentially a Claude Code or a cursor in a box inside the Lightdash UI. And so on every page, you can slide it over, and it has the ability not only to adjust the dashboard in front of you, which is like something you might expect from like AI in a product, but it actually still has access to like all of the code definitions of your project. So you can pop that open and you can start using it as your autonomous agent. You can say, hey, go and I did a demo of this on LinkedIn, go make all of the charts in my organization pink, right? If you have permissions to do that, and you send Claude off and it can do all of those things. And you'll be able to do that without having to like know about Git and without having to check out, download Claude Code, but you'll still get all of the same benefits. So that's one thing that's coming soon. And we're also experimenting with more of a Claude Code that runs basically in an infinite loop. So it will sit there, and we have this running internally right now. We have a Slack channel where we have a data analyst bot, essentially. And it's there all the time, monitoring our repository, seeing what changes that people are making fixes. If someone ships an error, it will do. And it will also suggest analyses for the day. So that's something that I think would be cool to demo next as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have no shortage of things to demo in the future. There's so much that we wanted to get in even today, but we just didn't have the time. Oliver, this has genuinely been great. Thank you so much for demoing this live. And we know like how nerve-wracking it is to do things live. But I think it went great. So thank you so much. And to everyone watching, we really appreciate you giving us an hour of your day. I hope it was worth it. If you are interested in trying the Agentic BI workflow for yourself, you can go right now to go.lightdash.com/trial. It's in the banner below. I'll also drop it in the chat. We've got a 21-day free trial where you can try this all out for free and let us know how it goes. If you prefer to talk to one of our team members, the page also has a calendar link where you can book in some time with the team and we can have a more guided conversation. But if you want to get started yourself, there's the option to do that as well without ever having to talk to a member of the Lightdash team. Well, also, this whole session was recorded. So if you signed up, if you registered, we will send this to you. It'll be dropped in your inbox below. And as always, you can reply with any questions you have, connect with the Lightdash team on LinkedIn, or join our Slack community. All of these links I'll put in the chat right now. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It was absolutely wonderful to spend our Wednesday afternoon with all of you. And we really hope that you were able to learn something and that this was useful. And thank you, Oliver, once again.
Thanks, Shanzi. See you later.